land of the free. And the home of
The now familiar lyrics drawn from a poem written by an American lawyer, Francis Scott Key, about a victorious battle over the British. Like other exercises in patriotism, the anthem is really drummed into people as an unassailable good thing, a tribute to courage and freedom, and who could be against that? But the mythology is misleading. America was not the land of the free for many residents in the early 1800s. When slavery thrived, most people couldn't vote. The founders touted overthrowing British tyranny, but they abused power to rule over other human beings, often more harshly than the deplorable British that they bragged about supplanting. So when you hear land of the free, does it sound like just some harmless relic? Or a hypocritical lie, laundered over and over to kind of tell us a mythology that covers up abuse to this very day? I mean, the answer might depend on your personal experience or your concern with discrimination and policy. And that brings us tonight to a contemporary poem about America and freedom called What's Free? It's actually marking an anniversary this week. It's a song with a verse by Jay-Z that opens by skewering those words.
In the land of the free where the blacks enslaved, 3/5 of a man, I believe's the phrase.
Jay-Z beginning his poem with those spare, haunting lines, comparing Francis Scott Key's claim with just the facts at the time. Slavery and a constitution that counted each black human being as 3/5 of a person, a notorious legal compromise that granted Southern states extra political power in Congress for their slave populations. A gruesome accounting. This history lesson turns on property, and Jay-Z's poem uses different accounting to chart a generational path from people literally being treated as property to people becoming owners.
I'm 50% of Duce and it's debt free, yeah. 100% of Ace of Spade worth half a beat. Rock Nation, half of that, that's my piece. 100% of title to bust it up with my G's. Most won't ever work together. You run a checker, but they never give you leverage.
Jay ticking off companies he started or owns a piece of. Half the liquor company Douce with no debt, a contrast to America's many unpaid debts. All of his champagne company Ace of Spades at $500 million. That half a B, a double entendre reference to his wife Beyonce, who could presumably own half of it in their marriage. He cites his company Tidal, which is the only streaming music platform that tries to empower musician owners, different than Spotify or Apple or Amazon. There are levels of wealth, and the contrast here in the poem is between money and equity. So as Jay-Z decries people's failure to collaborate, he notes they could run a checkup, that's spending money, but the owners, they never offer leverage, which is the equity, the ownership that can bestow real power and freedom in our current society. They say power concedes nothing without a demand, and capitalism is economic power. Those owners, they're not giving you leverage, no matter how hard you work. Most workers toil for wages in America with no path to any equity, and that's especially true in the arts and culture and music, where the people creating the value are often stuck in systems that deny them ownership of what they literally made. Now, what do you call using power to compel labor without valuing it fairly? Well, at a minimum, I'd say that's on the spectrum of oppression, economic or otherwise. This poem I'm sharing with you suggests America's sins live on, including a slave-owning mentality of some capitalists. And Jay-Z uses his words here to address them directly and then stunts on them.
I ain't one of these house you bought. My house like a resort. My house bigger than yours.
A rebuke to anyone with that mentality. It echoes also a classic Malcolm X speech that contrasts the evil slavery system's categories of house and field. But those lines are not rhetoric. They are a factual confrontation because Jay-Z is putting those capitalist suits, if you will, putting them in their place, flipping that house terminology to note the fact that his homes are literally larger than theirs, like a giant resort. So if you're not listening, you might mishear the line as just bragging about another mansion when it's actually a reference to how America's property system is built on a racist foundation. Now, in one lifetime, Jay-Z built his property fortune, dwarfing most of the nation's top execs, even though many of them had the head start of generational wealth amassed in a time when black Americans were legally classified as property. Now, this poem continues by confronting slavery's vestiges today.
To this day, Grandma afraid what I might say. They gonna have to kill me, Grandmama, I'm not their slave.
There, he's rebutting the idea anyone could scare him, let alone own him, but juxtaposing that with the life experience of his own grandmother, whose name is Hattie White. She was born in 1926. We checked. She faced the Jim Crow era, lived through the assassination of so many black leaders in America, so her concern would be understandable. But think about the echo of history here, especially at a time of rising hate in America right now and political violence. Jay stressing not that she lived that life before, but that she fears for him, for his safety in America, quote, to this day. Meaning her past lives on now, because it's not really past. And that history lesson continues.
We started without food in our mouth. They gave us pork and pig intestines. You discarded that we ingested. We made the project a wave. You came back, reinvested and gentrified it. Took of pride, now how that's free. And them people stole the song and hit with 360s.
The parallels there turn on value. He's describing slave owners presenting their unwanted and discarded animal parts as meals, which morphed into its own cuisine, sometimes linked to soul food. You have many people who abandoned diversifying neighborhoods in America. They saw them as undesirable through white flight and redlining and other policies, only to return after minority residents made those places valuable or cool, a wave. And then they used the same legal and property system to gentrify and price out the people who made those neighborhoods valuable. The theme here is how in America so many black people have had to meet that systemic discrimination with their own kind of improvised alchemy. What oppressors treat as garbage might still be turned somehow into gold. When that happens in the neighborhood, though, Jay is telling us the oppressors then come back and try to take it. The question is, what's free amidst all that theft? Those lines also link soul food and the commodification of black-led culture by slamming the executives who stole the soul, which is a Public Enemy reference, the execs who locked many artists into predatory contracts, then denying them ownership, the theme here, sometimes in deals so unfair that courts will call them unconscionable and unenforceable. Some of the worst contracts today are 360 deals where corporations have control of all the proceeds from an artist's work, even beyond music. That's a 360. So what's free when the owners are the thieves and the creators are stuck in a 360? We'll come back to that. Now, I began this report for you tonight with that myth about the land of the free. And this poem I'm sharing with you ends with another myth that's actually rarely questioned across most of U.S. history, maybe a little bit recently, depending on who you talk to. I'm talking about our Thanksgiving ritual, which is actually a very literal whitewashing of our history and reality. Well, he challenges it in this song, which came out, by the way, in the month of November.
Sucker free, no shucking me. I don't jive turkey. Say happy Thanksgiving. Sound like a murder to me. Smoke free, all of y'all calling out toll free. Label rob you for millions, yet you want to put a hole in me.
He's talking about independence. Financially, Jay says he does not shuck and jive for anyone. He's an owner. He flips that into saying he's no phony jive turkey and folds that into another type of independence, intellectual. No matter how many holidays we are sold, capitalistically or at school or anywhere else, he's just not down with Thanksgiving turkey or celebrating a genocide. So those holiday greetings, sound like a murder to me. The challenge here, as always, is to think originally and see reality, not the self-serving myths designed to obscure it. This poem shows the reality of property in American law and capitalism. From where America started, literally owning people as property, to controlling people today through their labor, to taking ownership of their work, stealing it so it's someone else's property. Now, Jay-Z says for him, freedom means owning whole companies rather than companies owning pieces of you. 100% of title. Notice that word whole. He laments people resenting him more than the larger system, imagining telling another artist, the record label rob you for millions, yet you want to put a hole in me. Millions lifted from the 360 deal he cited before. That bullet hole is a circle. Holes are 360 degrees, like a 360 deal, while Jay just showed his freedom comes from being financially whole, owning his whole companies, his whole creations. That's 360, 3 layers of meaning, triple entendre. Don't even ask me how. And that, what I've shared with you in this report, is just part of the whole verse, as it were. The poetry is as layered as the history. The poet's perseverance, a living lesson. And those who don't get it may not be listening. If you can't see why America was not the land of the free, or how Native American genocide is still disguised as a feast, you may have closed your eyes and your mind instead of listening. What's free? It's a very long answer, but it starts with freeing your mind.